Good evening. This is Bob Simon, your administrator for the Art of Publicité. Would somebody please wave your hand if you can hear me? Thank you. Once again, we have Xavier presenting to us about the Art of Publicité. Dr. Braget resided in Louisiana for 18 years, but he is currently living in his hometown, Marseille. There, he has resumed teaching both English and drama in the French public school system. Because of the late hour in France, he is providing a recorded presentation for us this evening. The wine cellar and Margine Miner, our wine consultant, have selected a libation for each class. The wine cellar is generously offering these to our participants at a discounted price. Tonight's wine is Louis Vuitton Muscadet Saverne et Maine, a crisp, dry white wine. Next week, the featured wine is sparkling rosé. Finally, thank you to Karen Geisert-Walk for her committee for planning this interesting series on the art of publicité. And now I will start in just a moment Jean's presentation, PowerPoint presentation.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the second talk of this series devoted.
Thank you. Let's start it again.
To the art of advertising. Because of technical issues and impossible updates on my PowerPoint, you won't see my face this time, but I will walk you through the art of publicité just the same. Just listen to my voice. I'll be your guide. I had a really good time last time when we talked about the Belle Époque. In our last live talk, we covered one of the most well-known period, the one that saw the birth of enamel plates and a lot of the, I would say, iconic ads and visuals that we are very familiar with and that are still commercialized nowadays. Today we will focus on the 1930s and the post-war period, and here I'm talking about the Second World War, and we'll go all the way to the late 70s, beginning of 80s. After the war, what was interesting was a new wave taking as a starting point the lessons of the great masters, and this period sets out in search of a new language more adapted to the new times. They are familiar at the time with painting, particularly Cubism, whether it is the lyrical Cubism that we know of resulting from post-impressionists like Cézanne, or a Cubism that has more of a set of formal variants.
Did you turn off your computer?
In some posters of Lupo that we are going to analyze, that we can see how marked this period is by the elegant pictorial touch that we find, and also we find that other people such as Cassandre, with its geometric design and neat motifs, has inspired this period. I would like to remind everyone also that this talk is based on the knowledge of semiotics. I briefly introduced you guys to the theory of the study of signs and symbols and their use and interpretation. We talked about Saussure, we talked about Charles Peirce, the sign, divided into two branches, the signifier and the signified. I'm not going to go over that here, but just bear in mind that semiotic is a science, the mission of which is to try to make more sense of the world and to analyze the signs, whether the signs are words, images, or sounds. But let's look at the two artists that really make this period what it is. First, let's look at Charles Lupo. Charles Lupo, wounded during World War I, moved to Switzerland, and this is where he settled, actually in Lausanne, where he stayed until 1923. He designed about 60 posters for Swiss companies when he was there before returning to France. Noticed by French printers, he creates an impressive series of posters at the time, including some for Voisin cars. I don't know if you're familiar with this brand. He also created posters for furniture, for Galerie Barbès, for Peugeot, and for Twinning tea, for Valentine paintings as well, products now manufactured in series. He settled in 1931 also in a workshop in Montmartre, where all the artists tended to congregate, specifically surrealist artists or cubists, such as Picasso. He created also posters for La Glace Sécurité in 1931, DOP, the shampoo, in 1935, and Ambre Solaire in 1936. He also created a wonderful ad for Coty in 1938. So let's have a look at the twinning visual. So Lupo promotes this very idea of promotion in a way, which requires his images to be a sort of magnification, I would say, in the first sense of the term. The poster twinning is by excellence semaphoric. Look at how at the foot of the giant letter, which is red and brown, you can find a cup of tea seen from a high angle perspective, so you can see the beverage, and which is given both as an object that is set here and as an offering through the angle. So the ordinary layman is imbued with rituality. Thus here, the sign of comfort is associated with the mark of a ceremonial. So you could see the smoke, it's a warm tea, it's comforting. This has the effect of inviting the reader or the spectator to count himself among the followers of high life who wanted in the 1930s this Anglophile vibes. You know, it was very popular at the time. And therefore, instead of coffee, which was considered quite ordinary and mundane, we have tea, which is presented as an elixir. At the time, twinning was a bit of a chic Britannicity imported into France, as you might know, when the twinning poster uses a coffee commercial indeed, in truth, sober and very elegant, that existed and that had been also commercialized and created by Lupo himself a year earlier. But he designed the cupboard for the Café Martinque, which used the same graphic sign, in charge of representing the olfaction used for the exaltation of tea. So we have really a parallel work here, and I want you to look at the slide here, and that will show you the origin, I would say, the genesis of the twinning advertising visual. So I really like this idea that he kept the same concept, but made it a little bit more posh and elitist with the use of the T. A visual that I mentioned earlier was that of the Ombre Solaire, sun tanning lotion. Here you could see the aesthetic, how 1930s it is. A lot of these bodies, sketches were very much of the same ilk. You could see that in front, those in front of facades or 1930s governmental buildings. But note here how tanning is a big deal to begin with. You remember that Chanel was the one who introduced tanning into the highest spheres of society. Last year we were talking about
Can't. I'm going to turn off the video. It turns off.
The elite turning into cafe life and nightlife. Well, tanning became one of these new fads that were embraced by everyone, including the elite that who used to think that tanning was not something proper people should do. So here we have almost a worshipping of the sun. The lady here is facing the rays of the sun. She is completely naked, and you could see that the sun is quite powerful, specifically with the contrast of her back, which is in the shade. The catchphrase underneath the brand's name is quite evocative. Pour brunir sans brûlure. You can note the alliteration in B's here, which tends to put the stress on the connection between brunir, tanning, and brûlure, burning. So this sun tanning lotion is meant to tan without burning. So I like how in the same kind of a proximity, the letter proximity, you could find two opposites that attract. The love or the worshipping of the sun can also cause damage, and that's what this sun tanning lotion is going to prevent. Note how the golden tone are both warm and prestigious in a way, in terms of a commodity. Look also how the shape of the bottle matches that of the fingers. That is in a way enhancing the fact that the lotion is all powerful, and it seems that the sun rays, 5 in number as you could count them, also mirror the sun worshippers' fingers, as though the hand of the sun was the ultimate puppeteer of the scene. So there's a wonderful ritualistic quality to this work, and it has become one of the most collected items by Lupo. This shampoo ad, DOP, lave et embellit les cheveux, it washes and embellishes your hair, is quite also interesting because you could still see the influence of the surrealists of the 1920s and 30s here. The golden tones for the blonde hair evoke gold, but evoke luxury again. So this is some sort of a prestigious shampoo to have. Note how the Greek profile is reminiscent of what Cocteau would do in his sketches, very much in the vein of what a Cocteau would have drawn at the time. The line is stylized, whether I'm speaking about the profile or the hair, and the pencil strokes are quite magnifying the hair here. It's almost a goddess that we're looking at. It's really effective because the absence of features helps the viewer, the spectator, or the potential customer project himself or herself in the face of the person, and therefore makes commercializing it much easier and reaching out to many more customers. Finally, let's look at this ad of the national maker Peugeot. You can notice how very much reminiscent of the 30s this aesthetic is. But look how the national make is put on a pedestal here with the constant reference of the blue, white, and red of the flag, of the national flag. So we have these number three coming up. We have the tricolor, the three-color cocarde, as we call it, the revolutionary one. We have the idea that it's a triangle shape image of a car. So once again, and also you have the repetition of shapes. So between the head and the two wheels, you have a number three. You have the roundness of the letter P, the letter G, and the O. It's very interesting. And finally, there's this use of blue, white, and red in the national use of the brand La Grande Marque Nationale, which is, of course, almost, I would say, something that evokes the slogan or the catchphrase or the national motto. Look at the futuristic design of the 30s, evoking movement and speed. Some of you who know visuals that have been created and produced in Italy will probably be very much impressed how France also embraced this movement. At the time, cycle commercials, commercials for boats, commercials for ships, commercials for cars were, of course, putting the stress on the speed, and this is what you can see here. I particularly would like to focus also on the profile of whoever is driving this car. I'm not sure if you would agree with me, but there is definitely, I would say, a wink at Marianne, the bust that represents democracy in France, as we can see her on national stamps, for example, or in any museums or governmental buildings. And there is definitely this appearance of Greek democracy with a Phrygian bonnet on her head. In 1936, Lupo had been commissioned by the aperitif company Saint Raphael to produce an updated image of the brand for the 1937 international exhibit that was held in Paris. So the following year, Lupo designed another variant of the design, this time showing the two servers swinging on chairs on a terrace. They are the ones finally are having a good time as opposed to waiting on other people. Clad in red and white, each waiter is a visual reminder of the products sold by the company, reasserted in the red and white bottles on the table. Lupo here, in order to produce the poster's delicate modeling of color, used an aerograph, an early form of airbrush, as it were. Through this technique, Lupo was able to both achieve the illusion of varied depth for the figural group and also fill the background with this kind of mysterious cloud and hazy plate of gradated color. The seated figures with their heavily delineated hands are reminiscent of the hugely popular designs that were produced by Lupo's rival, Cassandre, for the aperitif brand Dubonnet. I particularly like this one because it gives you a total French flair with, the cafe's awning, the idea of relaxation, the idea of a pre-dinner drink. It's really beautifully done and so forward, so futuristic as well. You notice how the hair, the lock of hair on the white waiter is very much in keeping with what we will see in Tintin. So this kind of ideal, typical French silhouette. Let's look to compare. Let's look at the other slides. You see, during the occupation, Lupo, who lived in his house in Chevroche, where he practiced painting, stopped doing commercials. Well, there was a reason. Since advertising for alcohol was banned by the Vichy regime, his work for Saint Raphael stopped overnight, but resumed after the war. And this is what the poster that he did right after the war, when alcohol was authorized again in 1950, and Saint Raphael became known again. Here, same comments could be made. The national imagery with the blue, white, and red, the running waiters with their apron, their long, typical aprons, the patriotic colors, I said, the flags on top of all the roofs, the urban environments give also inviting touches of green for parks, terraces also, where cafes can be found. And finally, I'm sure a lot of you will agree on the obvious connection to Marc Chagall's color palette here, and even, I would go as far as to say, composition. If you look at a Marc Chagall painting, you will have this kind of feel of airiness, of patriotic airiness. There is some kind of poetry in Chagall, just as in Lupo's work. And it's quite interesting when you have time to go back to those images by Lupo for Saint Raphael drinks and Chagall, and it would strike you as quite impressively connected. The second person I would like to introduce you to in the 1930s as well, Jean Carlu. Jean Carlu created his first works in an Art Deco style, and I think he was interested in, for that matter. He really did a lot of posters for films. For example, when Charlie Chaplin's The Kid was released, he was the one who was actually commissioned to do the poster, and for different type of toothpaste. In particular, he created two posters that became quite famous. One was for Mon Savon, the soap, and one was for the Pigalle Theater. He also worked for Air France as an illustrator, but also as an artistic director in 1956. He was, I would say, one of the first poster maker, affichists, to integrate photography, using this technique as an additional element to the drawing. So I think the fusion of the art makes him a very special case in the world of poster making. You could see here how almost military looking and at the same time Art Deco-ish this poster looks. Once again, there's some kind of ominous character to the drawing, but what is interesting is, once again, we don't see the features of the person, so that everyone can project themselves. The idea of the white triangle makes it clear that it's about teeth, since it's a toothpaste commercial. And the color palette is quite interesting, because what clashes most with red is actually white, so this is the reason. But note how the way he embedded the profile into this kind of black shape on a brown background is very much echoing the works of Juan Gris, or surrealist collage artists that you might be familiar with. And there is some kind of inventiveness here, some kind of creativity that you could see in the fact that he doesn't like to use only one type of medium and he's going to mixed media, which I think is quite interesting for the time. Same thing could be said about his Mont Savon advertising that became really popular. Once again, a very collected item. He was attracted by Cubism and the work of Juan Gris, as well as the work by Albert Glaise. He was one of the first, Carlu, to understand that to fix the image of a brand in the mind of a consumer, you had to proceed by the use of, forms and very expressive colors. There was this idea that shape was important. In a way, it was very much of a, he was very much of a fauve in a way, because he really thought that, or a post-impressionist for that matter, because he really thought that color and shape made a painting or a poster for that matter. And these, very, I would say, grossly formed shapes and very expressive colors gave his posters their dimensions of work of art. You see this one here on this slide is very specific. Once again, you could see how the Mont Savon itself could almost, it's so realistically drawn that it looks like a photograph that's been embedded in the hands. The hands are very stylized. So is the man with his haircut, crew haircuts, but at the same time you get some tiles in the back, those motifs that are reminiscent of the tiles of a bathroom, of course, since we're talking about soap and personal hygiene. So everything is kind of mixed. It's a mix of media, once again, that really works very well. For those of you who understand French, there is definitely a pun. The brand called itself Mont Savon, which, if you separate Mont from Savon, means my soap. So it's easy to adopt the soap because it becomes your soap very easily because of the name. Look at this again. How could you not link this aesthetic to Juan Gris composition and collage style work? This is very clear here. The star also reminds us of Cocteau in a way. He was, once again, Carlu, the first to incorporate this kind of mixed media style. And as I said, and as you're going to see it in the next slide, he was using also photography as an additional element to drawing. This is a poster, a propaganda poster against disarmament of nations. And you could see here that we're bordering surrealist collages here with this mother who is really afraid, holding her kid very tight as to what is the future of nations if they stop, sponsoring the army. So it's quite interesting to see how there are so many dangers that have been graphically symbolized here. The shell, the triangle, which means danger, the earth is burning and red. The poster also is reminiscent of dictatorship or oppressive governments. It's quite interesting to see how it could do something very powerful. Of course, here his goal is not promoting a product, but promoting an idea. And I think his work is even stronger when there is a social message to be passed on to members of society. Look how different this looks compared to the one we just saw, and it's still Carlu. So be aware that a lot of Air France posters, I remember I had a lot of them plastered on my walls in my office at Loyola. It's interesting because a lot of people know those posters, but they've been created by artists that came later than Carlu, And this one was one of the first kind of new take that Air France was opting for. And you could see that it's quite different from whatever you would think an airline company would choose to advertise its flights. Here you could see a little bit of surrealism, a little bit of cubism, a little bit of collage work. The fact that not everything is treated the same way. You have fully colored patterns, you have sketches in the midst, you have a work on the line, you have a work on geometric patterns. Of course, we all realize that it is an aerial view. It's from a bird's eye view. Of course, for an airline company that makes sense, but it's quite witty here. And it also shows the diversity of France. There is some picturesqueness of France here, but there's also the idea that France is, has called itself the Garden of Europe. So you have fields, green fields, you have cornfields, you have pumpkin fields, you have carrots fields, you have all types of agricultural memos, and it's quite working. All this on a light blue, light gray background that makes it stand out. It's hard to believe this is the same artist that was working on the disarmament poster, but it is. Again, this idea of collage, puzzle almost, a puzzle-like picture that is really happy. It's a joyful combination of colors and also some kind of a world tour of different countries that Air France is offering flights to. We have the lower part, of course, you recognize Italy with the Tower of Pizza. You have Canada on the left. You have Spain on the left, upper left corner. France, of course. Scotland. I believe Greece, and so on and so forth. The idea is the multifaceted poster really reflects and mirrors the offers that Air France is providing its customers with. So I believe that having the different types of colors, a joyful pattern, makes travel, airline traveling really a fun experience. Note how the font are very clear and they go straight to the point. There is no flourishing in the font that are used in the 30s and 50s. And this is quite something to notice because this is a recurrent way to look at the message. The message should not be turned into some kind of enigma or, you have to immediately see what it's all about, which will change over the years. And as you know, puns and mysterious fonts, or original fonts, I would say, not so much mysterious, but original fonts are being used much more often nowadays. Cassandre is, I mentioned Cassandre also having worked and having influenced the former artist I mentioned today. Cassandre, little by little, get closer to the Bauhaus aesthetic. And he was born in Ukraine, and as you know, the Bauhaus is an art school founded in Germany by Gropius, and Bauhaus artists usually work on modern architectural reflections, and they also worked on drawing and dance. And very quickly, Cassandre carried out advertising works, which he considered as food work, while waiting to be able to live from his canvases, which he never really could do. He will say painting is a goal in itself, and the poster is only a means of communication between the merchant and the public. This is what he thought. He always began by painting the text of his posters before the images. That's quite interesting. The font and the lettering gave the tone, set the tone. According to him, the words and images of an advertisement must immediately arouse emotion and provoke associations of ideas. And his work, you will see, is a great source of inspiration. Let's quickly have a look at those. You could see they're graphically attention grabbing. You have one major element on the left, the driver, on the right, the shoes that are extremely realistically drawn with, again, the airbrush technique, a very clear font that doesn't beat around the bush, and definitely an aesthetic that is borrowing from the 1920s, 1930s. Here I wanted to show you the tone, the proximity of tones. It's this brown is of course very manly, and it makes sense because the left poster triplex is about a glass and mirror company, while the other one is for shoes for men, male shoes. So we get that gentleman look. We have this kind of technicity also, I would say, because the shoe here is presented like almost, and that's why I put them close to one another, next to one another. The shoe is presented almost as a means of transportation here, as if you were advertising for a car, and I think that's quite interesting. Note how the angles are very sharp. You have a lot of, triangles in this. You have the triangle here. You have a triangle here. You have a triangle happening here with the shoes. Here with the shoe. So it's very harsh, but it's in your face and you can escape. So once again, he believed in this direct message between the product, from the product to the customer. I'm sure you're familiar with this. Often his art was seen by critics or by the graphist in his circles as geometric and monumental. Well, I could not find a better example than that here, by including this Normandy transatlantic cruise boat ship in this presentation. It is one of the most, I would say, reproduced poster. You find in postcards in France, you find it in different halls, you find it on mugs, on keychains, on aprons even, I've seen. So it is really something that is imposing and that is almost finding its way through the waters in a with steel strength and might. You find this idea that I was mentioning, this idea of masculinity, really is reinforced here by this frontal, graphic, and unapologetic use of the front of the boat. You could see also there is some sort of pride here that is shown by the colors white, the combination of color, blue, white, red, the blue background, white of the boat, and the bottom. And there is also this idea of honoring history. Normandy speaks for itself. I really like this poster. And I also like this one, which was done for a cruise, I mean, at least a journey between Holland and America. Look out, 1930s. It screams 1930s. You have, of course, the chimneys, but you have this idea of the phallic symbol. So once again, a very manly look, which is also corroborated by the strong lettering, the font that is once again not beating around the bush, but is very clear. The softness of that you can get is maybe the roundness of the chimneys, but once again, it is counterbalanced with the might of the three columns, the three chimneys. You might think that, you know, what softens the whole thing is the smoke in the background, high in the sea, and it's true. And mostly this is something that would actually be targeting a male customer line. I'm sure you know this because I presented it to you. Yes, so you know that Cassandre is also the creator of the logo Yves Saint Laurent, designed in Monogram. The text has always been an integral part of Cassandre's creations. Indeed, the creative that he was said, the drawing must be based on the text and not the reverse. So it's interesting. We've seen it in the former slide that he would choose the lettering first and the font and then go into drawing or sketching. But in this, there was nothing else to be done except choosing the background. And this approach that the drawing must be based on the text and not the reverse is the approach found in the Yves Saint Laurent monogram here. In order to create a sign intended to establish a clear and powerful communication, Cassandre draws inspiration from Roman lapidary writings, thus inscribing the YSL logo in the collective memory of everyone, at least in the Western Hemisphere. So it's interesting, and you know how I'm attached to this monograms. It's the one I inherited from Yves Saint Laurent on his little sketching cards that he would use in order to get inspiration. They are elongated, they are, you know, vertical. You use them vertically, and of course it was easy to create silhouettes and sketch silhouettes and add the fabric with a piece of tape. So when I was given those beautiful cards, I cherished them and I kept them as icons of these times. Cassandre was really, as you could see, the greatest and I would say the best graphic designer of his time. The first thing we did even before we raised the funds or found the collaborator was to meet with him. As French people, we decided that he had drawn so many beautiful, iconic initials. He did the initials of Christian Dior, but he was forgotten. It was in 1961. So when he decided to meet with the Yves Saint Laurent team, he made them only one proposal, the intertwined initials, and that meeting took place at a restaurant in Paris called Le Débarcadère, and Yves Saint Laurent said yes immediately. Last but not least, it's interesting for you to know that Cassandre is the one who came up with two typographies, fonts, such as Bifur on the right, once again, very 1930s inspired, and Peignot. Peignot is a little bit more, I would say, 50s inspires. I'm sure you would agree. And don't you think that Peignot actually looks like Peugeot? It's a type of G that goes down. That's quite interesting. Voilà, Cassandre, a name to remember. Let's move on to Paul Colin. Paul Colin, after a series of achievements that strongly marked the 1930s, chose a more limited way in his considerable production for the show and the theater until the Second World War, animated by great artistic currents, as we've seen. You remember Cubism and Futurism and later Surrealism. The poster does not lose any of its vital force. However, a marked break is beginning to widen between Europe and the United States. And I think it was very interesting for you guys to know that it's really on the other side of the Atlantic that urban planning and gigantism and the development of advertising theory create a situation that you will only experience 30 years later. So it's interesting. And Colin participated into this series of achievements that really marked this time. You remember this show with Josephine Baker and a famous belt of banana dance. Once peace is restored after the war, the poster, and in particular the advertising poster, has difficulty finding its identity. As you could see, there were different styles. Some were borrowing from Cubism, some from futuristic lines, some from surrealism. And the reasons for that lack of direction are both economic and aesthetic in a way. On the one hand, you have the ruined world suffering from the shortage of materials and products and services that are in that advertising needs to prosper. And on the other hand, the plastic arts, which have inspired poster artists in their aesthetic research for several decades, are themselves experiencing a crisis. So you are stuck between two trends that are kind of stagnating at one point. And so the renewal will come with people who have a different view at looking at what posters mean and what promotion means. Raymond Savignac and other colleagues of his are really part of this 1950s revival. Raymond Savignac he was known as the man who makes walls smile and paper think. He is really undoubtedly one of the most famous French graphic poster artists. He revolutionized the genre after the war. Imagine that he created more than 600 advertising posters, the most famous of which remain to this day the Mont Savant soap. We will see again Mont Savant. Mont Savant is a brand that is being used a lot in France, so a lot of artists contributed to its prosperity. And he signed his consecration in 1949 with different posters, Bic, the pen, or the poster of The War of the Buttons, which was a famous movie and a famous book. He marked the history of the poster with, I would say, his poetry. When I presented to my students, I said there's some sense of poetry and a sense of shortcut as well, and this cheerful humor. His posters have the humor and the spontaneity of childhood. So under an apparent lightness, the simplicity of the line fits into a real plastic approach, as it were. He wanted his posters to have the beauty of the obvious, and thus he created concepts, humorous scenes for the most part, where the character arouses the complicity of the passerby. Here's an example. I thought it was really wonderful to show you this one, specifically with what we know has happened to Notre Dame. So there was this project in the 1950s, when it was a lot of rebuilding and reconstruction, of having an interstate on the left bank in Paris, which of course everyone alive vetoed. And I like how he used the church here, which is not always a way to unify people in France, as you know. Since the revolution, there's always been a backlash and a rejection of the church as an institution. I'm not talking about faith, I'm talking about the church as an institution, as a landowner. But here we have the church unifying people and asking to be saved with this punny use of the architecture of the cathedral, turned into a personified victim of the magma of traffic. Note how the black use of for the cars which are not seen as distinct vehicles, but as a sea of torment, is really, really working here. There's nothing like presenting a danger through the use of numbers, through use of mass and quantity, and unidentifiable quantity of dangers, and I think this really works. Same thing with Air France. I really like the punny aspect of his poster here. Once again, childish quality, childhood quality with the giraffe, always referring to animal, which tends to soothe the vibes and the feel. But there's a definitely patriotic component here with the blue, white, and red airplane. But what is interesting is the catchphrase, le plus long réseau du monde, the longest network in the world, echoing the neck of the giraffe. So once again, all the flags within the giraffes, as you can see, speaks of all the destinations that Air France offers. Really punny. This is really his baby. I'm going to quote him. He once said, "I was born at age 41 from the cow's horn." So it's very interesting because he really believes that his life as a graphic designer started with this Mont Savant commercial. So here, you remember last time when we talked about the cube, the chicken cube that Capiello designed for? You remember that this process was called transubstantiation, excuse me, when you use that term to present that the artist is introducing us not only to the origin of the product, but to the content of the product itself. And well, that's exactly what's happening here. The cow is presented as, you know, the origin of the milk that is used for the soap. So you have both the origin and the product, and that's it. It's a very punny way, but it's also punny because it uses a very, once again, childlike drawing, very basic sketches with very basic colors, but it really works because, after all, everyone uses soap, and the idea of connecting soap with milk, the softness of milks, the softness of childhood is a very, very money-making process here. It's a very good strategic business approach, and at the same time, it has all the naivete of a childhood drawing. It's probably one of his most iconic pieces and one of the most collected in the world. Savignac, left for the United States in 1938, which then put an end to his collaboration with Cassandre, but he didn't like his years in the States. There were difficult years of food work, which Savignac himself called uninteresting. I just wanted to show you some of his work for Life magazine. No need for translation here, but I think once again, his almost basic, easy, attention-grabbing, and also child-like drawings are still pulling us towards them. The use of colors is masterful, with the contrast between the yellow and the browns and the orange, and on the other side, the blue, white, and red. There is something to be said about how he, I would say, surpasses the basic look of it and adds some sort of pun. Same thing with what he did when he worked for newspapers in France. Le Provençal, if you've been in the south of France, used to be a newspaper that would cover the news from the French Riviera to Provence, and it is now been renamed La Provence. Here again, very simple, apparently simple idea. The sun is personified and is holding the newspaper. Why the sun? Obviously because of the French Riviera. But I don't think you should be fooled by the look of this apparent simplicity, because if you really look in the background here, this is pretty delicate work here with the either Promenade des Anglais or La Croisette if it's in Cannes. So whether it is Nice or Cannes, it's pretty much reminiscent of the work of Raoul Dufy, if you're familiar with Raoul Dufy's sketches and watercolor, or even mixed media work, where there is a wash of color, often watercolor mixed with pastel, and then you have those sketches done in black ink that kind of perspires through the coloring, which gives a little bit of an edge and a fun look to. And I think he was largely inspired by the work of Raoul Dufy. This is also a work that made him popular. Gitane is a brand of cigarettes. So what is interesting is this is another color that you would associate it to I would say, Gitane, which means gypsy or the flamenco work. But nevertheless, you have some iconic pieces that are reminiscent of, I would say, Spanish culture, but with a color that is reflecting the color of the cigarettes. So punny way to literally make the product part of a culture. I think this is a way to distill the idea that the new culture now is the culture of smoking. Remember, it is the 50s we're talking about here. And the product is actually starting to be everywhere. Here, and also here. It's raining cigarettes in a way. Interesting also to show that it chose a woman to smoke and not a man. Here I just wanted you to be able to enjoy this pun, this witty catchphrase, l'écriture souple. You know, in France, people are very strict with handwriting. You spend years doing lines of writing when you're at school. From, I would say, the midsection, from the age of 3 to the age of 6, you will do lines of writing. And as you might have seen, the lines in the notebooks are quite different. They're very strict, like music score, and you have to abide by certain length for the T's, the buckle of the F is done in a certain way, you connect letters in a certain way. Well, there is a whole culture of writing. So when he comes up with this idea of first the sausage dog and some kind of, I would say, mime-looking guide with his ball hat, and connect it with Bic, and it really, it really strikes home. It's a home run. It's really good. Écriture souple means supple handwriting, really soft handwriting, which is, of course, referring to the flexibility that this new pen is offering. And I kind of like this idea of making the concept obvious. Again, as you would expect in a childhood book. Same thing happens here. The drink is for an orange drink of the time that no longer exists, and Tintin Orange is really referring to his hair. Tintin is red-haired, so he really is putting the stress on the fact that the drink is orange based, but the pun here has to do with the fact that despite the fact that everything is about orange, the drink is yellow, and the name and the name of the flavor, referring to the flavor, is yellow. So once again, what seems to be easy to understand hides some punny, witty component. In the 60s, designers worked freely as no agency had formed yet. So we have to wait for the 70s and the advent of agencies for posters to be guided by common trends, and in some ways for the creative juices to be quenched, because here I really want to put the stress on the fact that the reason why we like those posters so much and they've become great collector's items is because they came from so many different walks of life. There was no guideline. There was no specific way to create a poster. Everyone, depending on their references, whether it was futurism or cubism or surrealism, the mixing of techniques, the mixing of media, well, everyone could do anything they wanted. That made the work very varied. And this will change after the 60s. So it's interesting to look at the wide array of products, from mugs to keychains to backpacks and to trays that have been iconic representations of the 60s. Raymond Gide was responsible for the campaigns for Bally shoes, the Swiss brand. Note how the sketch is almost Japanese in its execution. It's soft, it's stylized, it shows the body, it emphasizes the shoe, but in a very streamlined way. Same thing with Jacques Aurillac, who you could see was already tapping into optical illusions and I would say graphic work. I cannot help from thinking that this work is what you found in the 60s on records. And it is true that when I tried to find a way to compare those to things that I would know in art, I would either go towards Vasarely, the Italian graphic artist, or optical illusions to be found in discotheques, on disco posters and disco balls of the time. It's very interesting. Early disco. It's hard to believe that some posters are made by the same people, but as we could see, Jacques Aurillac also was responsible for Air France posters. You could see the one on the left. And note again that the echo to the work by Raoul Dufy is obvious here. Look at the front, the scenic drive and the promenade along the coast, the coastline, the use of palm trees, the use of buildings, the little touches here and there of black and colors are very much the same. So it's quite interesting to see how they will pull from different artists. Same thing with Hervé Morvan. Again, you remember we saw another Gitane poster, but here the product was everywhere. But here there's really deep work on a graphic and on how to graphically include the products within the protagonist. And I believe that the one on the left is probably the most convincing one, with a beautiful white shirt of this flamenco dancer being made of there is cigarettes as he's smoking one while he is dancing. And the second one on the right, also creating almost an optical illusion. You don't even know whether the dancer, again, flamenco dancer or Cuban dancer, is embedded within the framework of cigarettes, if she is really detaching herself from it, from a background of it. Very cool posters. Guy Georget also participated in the promotion of Air France flights, and note how those are complete works that are borrowing from, I would say, Matisse cuttings. It's very clear that there is this aesthetic of cutouts, collages. Nothing is really perfect, almost childlike again, I would like to say. The layering is intense because you have different plans mixing with one another. Yes, the poster on the right is promoting Spain, so you definitely have some kind of mantilla going on with the fan and Goya-esque type of silhouette with the colors of Spain. For Middle East, you have, of course, all the attributes that are speaking about this region that at the time was still colonized. So it's interesting to talk about here, to see that there is a reference to oil, to richness, to luxury, but in a very, very cut out and Matisse manner. The 70s in France were indelibly marked by the rebellion that shook the country in May 68, right? The riots spearheaded by the workers' unions and seconded by the students, who demanded a profound New Deal in social classes and professional or educational opportunities. Socio-political history and cultural life bear the imprint of this violence and the changes it has brought about. Mai 68, May 68. So during this period of crisis, the paralysis of the country is total. That of normal information also. Newspapers no longer appear because of the strikes. Television and radio, controlled by the state, only broadcast filtered information. The poster will therefore be the only means of communication during the 70s of free and rapid information. It regains a privileged place, returning to its primary function, which is to inform. So the wall newspaper is reborn in the 70s. Illustrate with a vigorous graphic, concentrated, stripped of any artifice, aiming only at being efficient. So you find aggressive caricatures. They are printed in silk screen. There are fast techniques to use, and they're very flexible. The entire production of the Atelier de l'École des Beaux-Arts, of the Fine Arts, renamed Atelier Populaire, is in this respect representative. And I would like you to be introduced to a group that really was responsible for that. But first, let's look at this slide. You could see the rupture. Will cause creative agencies and graphic designers a reflection that's illustrated in the 70s in two ways. On the one hand, you have the pure and simple recovery of the recipe of May 68, which is rebellion. So you have the skinning and apparent saving of means for campaigns like Armour. Armour doesn't beat around the bush. Armour actually was an office equipment and supplies company. And in 1976, It started introducing slogans in two directions: death to stains, down with the mess, no more mistakes, like here, abat le désordre, down with the mess. And they were politically inspired. As a matter of fact, those could be political tracts for the Communist Party in France at the same time. So there is this idea of order after the disorder, after the unruly times caused by May 68, the fact that then de Gaulle resigned and decided not to end this presidency, the fact that the colonized world was falling to parts. This is this vibe that you can feel in the poster. Same thing here, with all kinds of posters that looked like they were amateurish, so with different slogans. I just wanted to remind some of you of the I'm sure a lot of you know them already, the slogans that came from May 68, the most famous of which was "It's forbidden to forbid," or "Under the cobblestones, the beach," which was, of course, the fact that students destroyed some streets with bombing and all types of destructive strategies. They destroyed the streets in Paris. Also saying that underneath that tarring their streets was so against this feeling of freedom they all were looking for. So underneath the cobblestones, they could find the beach. So it's one of the slogans that they used, mostly the students. Be realistic, ask for the impossible. I love this one. Make love, not stores. In French, you know the use of faire les magasins to shop, to do some shopping, and faire l'amour, to make love. So very provocative. Bernard Vimont is probably, on the other hand, someone who is searching for sophistication and who is oriented towards the artistic use of photography as well, which will reach its peak of perfection in the 80s. But let's look at probably one of the most famous 1950s, 60s, and like 70s campaign by Orangina, by Bernard Vimont. The stylized shape, once again, are reminiscent of Magritte cutouts, while the Orangina bubbling hairdo are already announcing the 70s disco revolution. It's a pop of color. It's an ode, a tribute to citrus fruit, to the freshness of an Orangina. It really works, and the font has become legendary. Let me have just the pleasure to show you those ones as well, with the pulp and the skin. You see how they mention that this is done with pulp, à la pulpe d'orange, and also this punny way to use the word fruitillant, which doesn't exist. It's a fusion between pétillant, sparkling, and fruity, made of fruit. So you have this creation, this neological creation, fruitillant, which was a big thing at the time, the use of puns. On the other hand, as I said, the 80s are going to be marked with sophistication and also the use of posters. And there is one name that stands out, is Jean-Paul Goude. Jean-Paul Goude, you might have known him because he was the one who orchestrated one of the Olympic ceremony, the opening of the Olympics. I could not remember for the life of me which year, but he has this, he creates these creatures that serves several trends, and several trends must be distinguished in the 80s. You see, for example, his big, I would say, reason for fame as a graphic artist was the use of Grace Jones for the campaign for the Citroën CX GTI Turbo, C'est Démon, or La Beauté Sauvage, Wild Beauty. Jean-Paul Goude was really known for these very harsh graphic designs, always based on a strong concept. Here we have this wild creature, which is half woman, half AI already at the time, and this idea of dissociation between the product and the way it is promoted. So there's not always a connection, like in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, between what you sell and how you sell it. There's almost a search for the idea that it should not be connected. And this is quite interesting. And this is what Jean-Paul Goude does very well. In the 80s as well, you have the advent of real creativity with the input of great photographers working for advertising. Helmut Newton is one of them, but Sarah Moon for Cacharel has done absolutely subtle work. When I look at this picture, I'm thinking of Cacharel, of course, because it is one of the woolen vests, but I'm thinking Sonia Rykiel as well. These women are from another time. You think Great Gatsby, there was this revival of those 1920s. You think also of Edward Hopper, oil paintings. Slot Machine comes to my mind. This idea of the bell hat and those shoulders going down with those smoky eyes and red lipsticks. I mean, yes, we are in the 70s, but there is a whole revival of the 1920s. Sarah Moon continued for Liberty fabrics. Here we are almost going towards an erotic component that is also reminiscent of David Hamilton's photography. But there is still the smoky eyes, the twiggy look in a way, and the frailty of the body with very beautiful body positions. Jean Lucieff is totally different. You remember that Jean Lucieff is the one who photographed Yves Saint Laurent for his perfume. I'm going to say a few words in the next slide, but Jean Lucieff, black and white photography, very classy, very sometimes surrealistic, like a Magritte painting. I'm sure you would agree with that. Sometimes completely disconnected from what you are advertising. As a matter of fact, this one was not for cellos. It was for stockings. So you have to, think before the apparent product comes to your mind. And often those posters was shown as this. You would have to wait a few more days or get to another metro station to actually find the name of the product on another image. So they would risk, bringing the product out there without having to mention the product, which is really a French, way to do things, because in America, you tend to have the product immediately available to the potential clientele. Here is the photograph that I was just mentioning. In 1971, as you know, Yves Saint Laurent successfully launched two perfumes. A feminine perfume, which is called Rive Gauche, Left Bank, where he opened actually his ready-to-wear boutique with a more affordable price point. And then another fragrance, a masculine perfume called Pour Homme, for men. Both are placed under the signs of boldness, but since, for the female fragrance, he connected it to his boutique Rive Gauche, Left Bank. He who had been considered a couturier, so just going into a ready-to-wear was a revolution. And for the male perfume, it was a scandal that he kindly organized, because he decided to pose naked in front of Jean Lucieff's objective for the promotion of his perfume. In 1997, Pierre Berger, Yves Saint Laurent's business partner and long life partner, explains that it was just a provocation for Yves. It did not address any specific communities, even though it can have a resonance in some communities, but he was not trying to reach out to the gay community in Paris. It was mostly a way to become a mythical. There is a Jesus superstar type of look in his position, and the halo behind him, of course, equates to saying that Yves Saint Laurent is a god and has created a bunch of followers, of worshippers. And there's some kind of biblical purity to that too, by being naked. The idea that not only because you put fragrance on your skin, and that skin is always very important in perfume commercials, but the idea that this is a pure elixir that you might use. You remember that later on it will be just as scandalous when he created the design for Opium, another fragrance. As you know, Yves Saint Laurent was an opium addict, had become so because of some treatment when he did after his military service, and had become an addict. So it was interesting for him to be provocative in that manner. Here, it's not provocation through illegal substances, it's provocation through nudity, male nudity, and also the idea that he mixes religion and fashion and high fashion. Of course, the second trend that I was talking about in the use of photography is a technical means in the service of the idea. So here we're entering the process of creation. The most beautiful idea that photography can serve the idea of a product is the example of Woolmark, a wool label, as you know, whose logo was made here in this photograph of a sheep, which really are themselves wool. So once again, la laine est vraie, as you could read in the catchphrase. Wool is true, is authentic, is exemplified by this beautiful image, this photography. Le temps ne peut rien contre nous. This is really interesting. Cézanne here uses a small bistro that's wedged between two glass, obviously modern skyscrapers. They're a symbol of the perenniality of the brand. It seems like tradition is stronger than progress and will resist not only the test of time, but the fads of times. So this is, in a way, a means to reassure the customer base, but also to reiterate that consumerism in Europe, and in France in particular, will not align itself with the US trends, i.e. the skyscrapers sandwiching the small cafe serving Cinzano. So le temps ne peut rien contre nous, time cannot do anything against us. It's kind of a warning. And you could see that also as opposite symbols to the skyscrapers, to the US skyscrapers. We have two cars that are typically French. On the left-hand side, you have a Peugeot, and on the right-hand side, the DS by Citroën. Very, very good commercial. This is it's punny, but it's cynical. And we start seeing a lot more work done on catchphrases and slogans in the 70s, late 70s, specifically with the women's sexual revolution. The documentary here, photography of the product, is the third trend. I could have chosen a washing machine. I could have chose, a toaster, but I chose the pressure cooker because this poster is actually not as basic as some of the documentary photography can be. And it's mostly due to the punny catchphrase, offrez des fleurs. You know how a lot of women consider it a faux pas to be gifted something that has to do with cooking or a house appliance, because it literally indicates to them what they have to do, what they're best at. So in order to fight against those stereotypes and not to gift your mother, your sister, something that could be used in the kitchen, French started having those, I would say, campaigns against these types of gifts for Christmas or for Mother's Day. And they are playing on this, of course, still advertising for a pressure cooker, but by Seb, but making it punny by saying, offer flowers. So the idea that the pressure cooker here is like a bunch of flowers and should be then considered as such and be gifted in such a way, and not as an imposition upon the duties or the expected duties of a woman. Punny catchphrase. The 80s also see the birth of what we call the teasing campaigns or enticing poster campaigns. And this is one of the first examples in France that these types of campaigns appear. Their creation makes public Avenir as a new agency, and Avenir has an ability to synchronize a panel, a whole 3-day event campaign on its entire panel fleet. Trigger warning here, okay? I'm going to show you something. I'm not showing the whole thing because it's hard to find on the internet now. But the campaign I'm about to show you was scandalous and created a stir. I still remember I was very young and I was shocked by it, but shocked was exactly what it was going for. So the campaign had one poster that said, "Tomorrow I'm taking the top off." Here it is. So it started at the end of the summer, Indian summer in France. So we were 2nd of September, and this girl who became the face of this bathing suit company, but also for the agency itself, the advertising agency itself, claimed that she was going to go as far as taking the top off. Then a week later, we had her telling us that she would take the bottom off. And so, of course, there was this kind of enticing expectation, of would she go as far? Will she end up actually naked? And what happened was that she did. But of course, there was a flip. And instead of frontal nudity, she turned around and was definitely nude, but not in a sexual way, just in a provocative way. It was a new wave for France to create teasing campaigns and provocative campaigns. We brought the some kind of eroticism into the mix, and I believe that has never stopped ever since, as we could see in campaigns by Dolce & Gabbana or other brands that use nudity on a regular basis or provocation. Finally, I would like to finish not on a cheesy and I would say almost tasteless commercial, but on a really beautiful one for Orangina by Vilmo, who continued to work in the late 70s and early 80s. Here in this 1983, as a matter of fact, panoramic poster, which is not often the case. As you could see, most of the posters were vertical, but this was a panoramic one by Vimo. The artist is using a very famous reference, that of La Ronde by Matisse, to express the festive and refreshing joy of drinking an Orangina. Let me show you the original. In a way, and that will be my conclusion for this talk, advertising requires a solid knowledge of the market. It requires to be aware of the values of a brand, and above all, it requires creativity. The connections, I believe, between visual ads and art are obvious, and this is why I wanted to leave you with this beautiful colorful and joyful inspiration piece by René Matisse. I hope you enjoyed this talk, even though technique didn't allow me to be present in the screen, in the medallion. But if you want to study further what we covered today, I would suggest this book, which is the story of an iconic communication agency by one of the most revered advertising guru, Jacques Seguela. And Jacques Seguela here explains how Havas, founded in 1835, resisted the test of time and became one of the most powerful advertising agency. The second book I would like to recommend is The Good Touch. You remember Good was the one who orchestrated the ceremony for the Olympic Games. But here you have the Galerie Lafayette, who have collected all the posters that he created for them, a 10-year campaign, which I'm sure you're all familiar with if you visited Paris in the 80s, 90s. And I think it really speaks of a truly Frenchy aesthetic, and I'm sure you'll enjoy that. Well, it's time for me to say goodbye, to say thank you most above all, and I will have the pleasure to present to you another non-live talk, a recorded talk, next week. And next week we will cover the 80s to now, to present time. So I hope that you'll enjoy it as much as I have enjoyed preparing those talks for you. Bye bye everyone. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you all so much for joining us for Jean's excellent presentation. And we'll have part 3 next week, same time, same place, and hope to see you all then. Good night.